And Nikita, if you have a pen, that'd be great.
Okay, one moment. We are live.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the March meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority, and thank you for attending. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the tragedy that occurred last week with the death of Mr. Arnault, a City of Buffalo firefighter. He died serving others and his community. I offer our condolences to his family, friends, fellow firefighters, and all those impacted. At this time, I ask for a moment of silence to honor the sacrifice made by Mr. Arnault. Thank you. Earlier today, the Audit, Finance, and Budget Committee met and authorized the posting of the BFSA's 2023-24 preliminary budget and related four-year financial plan in accordance with legal requirements. A copy of this document is under tab 1 in your board book. This preliminary budget and financial plan commences the public comment period. If any directors have any comments, we can take them at this time. If not, if you have any additional comments, please submit them to Jeanette. An updated version will be circulated by email as necessary. Approval of the final budget will be requested at the June meeting. There is no board action required today on this item. Let's begin today's meeting with Director Sanfilippo taking roll call of the directors. Andy?
Thanks, Fred. Jeanette Jurassic.
Present.
Frederick Foss.
Present.
Andrew Sanfilippo is here. Mayor Byron Brown, ex officio.
Present.
County Executive Mark Poloncarz, ex officio.
Present.
I believe that's it.
Thank you. And Chair Olson's been excused. So
That's correct.
our first item of business is to approve the board minutes from the BFSA's December 6, 2022 board meeting. The directors will find a draft of the minutes and accompanying resolution in your board book under tab 2. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
As moved.
Thank you. Second?
Seconded.
All right.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed? The minutes are approved. Our next item is to review and comment on the final 2023 capital budget and the proposed bond sale for the 2023 capital program. The board book includes an update on the final capital budget along with the city documents under tab 3. Additional documents submitted to us from the City Comptroller's Office in connection with the proposed capital borrowing are also provided under tab 3. Jeanette, can you briefly give us an explanation?
Yes, I will. I'm not able to share my screen, Nikita. Could you possibly bring up the presentation or whoever has access to it?
I can bring it up, Jeanette.
Thank you. All right, excellent. Thank you.
You are welcome.
All right, so thank you. So this update of the final capital budget supplements the report that Bryce Link provided to you in December when it was a not yet approved capital budget. The 2023 capital budget was approved by Common Council in December in the amount of $32.3 million. there were two actions that were taken by Common Council on this capital plan. The first was to reallocate $325,000 from the citywide infrastructure line to four individual projects. The second action was to further reallocate citywide infrastructure to the individual 9 council districts, so that in total, each council district has $500,000 allocated for projects within that specific area. The citywide infrastructure line that can be used for any general citywide purpose is $4.7 million. The 4 projects are listed on slide 3, Bryce. Thank you. So those are the 4 individual projects, one being in the Lovejoy district for Mead Resource Center improvements. And, you could see the rest of them yourselves, of course, but the thing to emphasize is that each council district ends up with $500,000, whether it's a general right-of-way allocation or whether it's a combination of right-of-way and these specific projects that are listed on this screen. Next slide, please. So the total amount of authorized but unissued projects increases to $18.9 million. Of this $18.9 million, $400,000 is included over the 5-year capital plan, which leaves a balance of $18.4 million, $18.5 million with project funding yet to be determined. Our recommendations, this is more a reminder of what our recommendations were that were made in December, is to plan out further beyond the 5-year capital plan, a further plan out period to map out projects to be funded through bonds, to determine and prioritize the projects that have been approved but are yet unsold. To continue to advise, we continue to advise a process to eliminate general operating expenses from the capital borrowing, careful consideration, of course, to the federal stimulus projects, and if there's any additional funding or capacity that can be located to enhance the capital investment in the city of Buffalo. And our continued recommendation that the city strongly consider leveraging the BFSA's higher credit rating to issue debt on behalf of the city. So from 2004 to 2007, BFSA was actively issuing debt on behalf of the city for deficit financing, new projects, refundings, and short-term notes. In contemplation of moving from a control period to an advisory period, the city began issuing debt for the city itself in 2008 and has continued to do so since that time. Next slide. Thank you. The BFSA's ratings remain unchanged. Fitch did affirm the AAA stable rating this past year. The city's underlying ratings remain the same as well. There is a 3 to a 5-step difference in ratings between BFSA and the city of Buffalo, and that's due directly to the direct intercept of state aid and sales tax that BFSA has. Because of this intercept provision, BFSA inherently has a more cost-effective financing framework and can sell bonds at a lower cost than the city of Buffalo can. Even without selling bonds, however, it's important to note that BFSA's just existence has a positive effect on the city of Buffalo. First of all, in terms of their bond ratings, BFSA is consistently cited within the underlying factors as a credit positive. And secondly, the city prices higher than what the market would typically price for those bond ratings. And that is attributed to investors knowing that there is a control board in place over the city of Buffalo. The next slide is just a very brief look back at the last 3 years of new money sales. 73% of bond proceeds from the 2022 sale last year have been expended or encumbered, with $6.8 million remaining. Backing out the encumbered and looking at just dollars out the door, 27% has been spent year to date. It's low, it's considerably lower, but it's consistent with what we have seen in past years. 2021, 90% of bond proceeds have been either spent or encumbered. That's 66% just dollars out the door. In 2020, that's a lot closer. 96% of bond funds expended or encumbered, with 94% of bond proceeds having been expended. The recommended debt limit is issued by the controller this past August is 26 million for 2023, and that will be the amount of the bond sale this year. It increases modestly over the next several years, up to 29 million in 2027. And the district again has requested bonds not be sold on its behalf and continues to use refunding savings from the JFCB program to fund their capital needs. The summary of the proposed 2023 capital financing is all the terms are outlined on this slide. It is expected to be a premium bond, total amount 26 million. The average life is 6.4 million, with the final maturity of June 30th, 2036. The estimated costs of issuance are 104,500. Underwriter's discount of 47,000. The estimated net interest cost of 2.95, that was run as of a particular date in February when the information was submitted to us. It's just, I looked back to see what the comparison was last year to give you a sense of how much interest rates have shifted since last year. And it's about 2.3 times higher than what was estimated last year. But that, of course, will vary on the date of sale between now and April. It is scheduled to be sold in April. That summarizes the proposed 2023 capital financing. We do have a representative from the controller's office if there's any questions, or I could certainly take anything back to the financial advisors if as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. I think that we still need to look at, with interest rates continuing to rise over the next few years, that the gap between what the BFSA can borrow and the city is going to only increase. And at some point, it's going to be, I think, important to save that money. So I'll just say that as we go and look at that. Okay. Are there any other comments?
Yes, in our written report, there is that a recommendation by us to, let's see, advise the city to begin a process to eliminate ongoing general operating expenses from capital borrowing. What are the dollar amounts in that kind of line blurring? Are the amounts large, or what? How can they even exist? Which is to say, general operating commingled with capital spending. Are the dollar
I'll let
amounts
you look up
large?
that amount for me while I answer the second part of your question, if you don't mind. So there, in general, operating expenses are not bondable, but these specific expenses, which we categorize, are categorized as general operating expenses, include tree planting, tree trimming, and demolitions.
All right. Okay.
In just those categories.
Okay.
And Bryce is looking up the amount from the December report.
It's approximately, if I remember correctly, 1.5 million. It'd be, I might be flipping it. I think it's $1 million for demolitions and 500,000 for the trees.
Because those are not capital categories per se. That's why this is an example of the bleed a little bit between the two categories, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And
Okay.
Can I?
it ends up being about, in general, about 5% of their total bonding capacity. So we do continue to make that recommendation from the standpoint that there's limited capacity for projects as is.
Can I ask a question regarding this?
Of
Go ahead,
course.
Andy.
What do bond counsel or say about whether it's appropriate and inappropriate? to
Bond
spend?
counsel, they have responded in terms of the legality of it, and not in terms of the fiduciary responsibility, I guess, for lack of a better term. Legally, you can borrow for those type of expenses.
Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, it's six of one, half a dozen the other as to whether how the city wants to proceed in those expenditures. I
Yeah,
mean, if it's not illegal, I
Right.
mean, who makes the determination whether it's appropriate and inappropriate?
Our recommendation has just been that because there are interest costs associated with it, and because it is a annual expense, that if possible, to shift those expenses back to the general fund. But this board has always acknowledged that it ultimately is, the decision of the elected officials for the city of Buffalo, how they want to do that.
Well, it all depends on how they want to defer the costs to their taxpayers too,
Right.
Well, or to belabor the point, those categories such as tree trimming, some of those costs are being paid for with borrowed dollars. Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
And as Andy pointed out, that's of course legal. So I guess end of point. Although we can make.
Well, okay. I'm sorry, Jeanette, to interrupt you. Let's put in perspective. You got elected officials from both the executive and legislative and controller branch making a determination as to how they feel they want to proceed with tree trimming and these other costs. And then you have an appointed board of directors trying to tell them they're doing it wrong. I can't see the logic in that.
I think, the board has made recommendations in terms of where dollars can be saved for the city of Buffalo. If this is moved out of, you're not paying interest on those type of expenses, it's a savings to the taxpayers. So that's primarily why this has been brought up in the past.
No, but it's a savings to the taxpayers on a one-time basis. I mean, they'll be paying more money for taxes if they just do it out of the general fund budget as opposed to, it's like paying your mortgage. You're not going to pay it all up front if you can defer it for 30 years. So, but I'm just saying it's an arbitrary assessment or position of this board to determine what we think is best, when at the same time we really don't have that responsibility to enforce the judgment of elected officials. So, that's a position that I take. We can keep bringing it up until doomsday, but as long as the bond lawyers seem to think that it's an appropriate, justifiable capital expense, I don't even know why we continue to beat that horse.
okay, thanks, Andy, noted.
Okay.
If I could just clarify, I inverted the two numbers. It was $1 million included for the citywide tree removal and planning, and $500,000 for the citywide demolitions.
Yeah. And can I make another an acknowledgement here?
Go ahead.
Looking over the $26 million or the cost of issuance for the bonds, I think we left out the fees being charged by the capital markets financial advisors. Am I wrong? Looking at
Bill,
We
maybe
have our
you could
municipal-
answer on this one. My understand that their fees have never been included in the cost of issuance. I think they bill directly to the city of Buffalo.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but Bill.
Well, I saw that our financial advisors built in their costs to the cost of issuance, but I didn't see. I mean, you got bond counsel, you got printing, you got paying agent. And obviously the more significant costs are from the credit rating agencies of all people,
Mhm,
you know, so.
mhm.
So if you take out the credit rating agencies, the overall cost is relatively insignificant, but you got to pay these guys to tell you what's wrong with you.
Yep.
But anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't know how it's computed or how you assess the financial advisor fees for the city.
Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah, I can look into that. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Oh, hi, Bill.
How you doing, Andy?
Okay. Why don't we move on to the next two items, which include a review of the city's second quarter GAAP report and the proposals within the New York State executive budget that could impact the city of Buffalo. The BFSA staff report on the second quarter is included under tab 3. Bryce, could you review this for us?
Absolutely. Excuse me. One moment. All right. At the end of the second quarter, the city is projecting a minimal year-end surplus of $300,000 with no variances to the overall budget when compared, with no significant variances when compared to the adopted budget amount of $566.7 million. The surplus consists of a favorable revenue variance of $2.2 million, which is offset by an unfavorable expenditure variance of $1.9 million. It is noted the year-end estimates include the additional cost estimates associated with the 2 winter storms in December 22, but not the potential FEMA reimbursement. In regards to revenue, you can see total department revenue is projected to be favorable by 2.2 million, with intergovernmental revenues being favorable by 3.5 million, and income interest being favorable by 3.6 million. And these are offset by unfavorable estimates of 3.4 million under miscellaneous. So the 3.6 million projected favorable budget variance in interest is attributed to the ARPA funds. They were not necessarily budgeted for this year. In addition, the higher interest rates that are currently being seen. The 3.5 million projected favorable budget variance in intergovernmental revenues attributed to a 3.1 million favorable variance in sales tax collection. The 3.4 million projected unfavorable budget variance in miscellaneous is attributed primarily to 3.3 million under the auction and capital asset sales that are not going to occur in the current year. And then there's a 1.5 million projected unfavorable combined budget variance in service charges, fines, and licenses and permits. The next slide we have here provides a detailed breakout of the intergovernmental funds, including adopted budget amounts and actuals for fiscal year 21-22 and current year budget and year-end projections. Intergovernmental revenues are single largest revenue category for the city, include the following revenues: state aid and incentives in municipalities, state aim, which is being maintained at 161.3 million. Sales tax, Federal American Rescue Plan Act funds, and the Tribal State Compact funds. Current year variance include a favorable year end of 3.1 million sales tax, as was mentioned, and then the all other is the remaining 340,000. The slide here shows the amount of ARPA funds that have been expended as of June 30th, 2022. Total of 55.4 million had been expended at that time, including 51 million for revenue replacement and 4.4 million for approved ARPA plan programs. Now, this next slide takes expenditures and obligations through December 31st, 2022. So you see the total original award was 331.4 million. As of December 31st, 51 million had been dispersed for revenue replacement, and then 11 million had been dispersed for approved ARPA plan programs. At that time, 82.1 million had been obligated. Now, the 82.1 million does include the 62.8 that had been expended to date. The remaining available balance, including amount to be obligated by December 31st, 2024, is 186.5 million. The remaining amount to be dispersed by December 31st, 2026 is 268.6 million. The next two slides.
I'm sorry, can I just, are these expenses all capital improvements?
No, they're not.
Okay.
Some of it, for example, last year, some of it went through for the enhanced summer youth employment programs. We do have their updated filings through 12/31, and I could provide you the additional detail by program after the meeting, Director Sanfilippo.
I think we also used, didn't the city also use ARPA money to pay off that what was it, a $25 million borrowing during the pandemic?
Technically, I believe they used the settlement from the tribal state compact for that, but they did utilize a significant portion in that first year for revenue replacement of $40 million. So that would have been, as I went back a slide, you'll see the 40 million there for fiscal year 21.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as I was about to say, the next two slides focus on the variances in regards to expenditures. The first slide is departmental expenditures only. And at the end of the year, they're estimated to be unfavorable by 1.9 million. This is largely due to the projected variance in the police department as well as public works.
Do we know what the big, police, we sort of understand along with fire, but public works, what was the issue with public works?
A large portion that was attributed to this two snowstorms.
So we may very well get FEMA money to cover that?
That is correct. My understanding, the paperwork's been filed, it's going through the process. It's more of a when and how much, my understanding, but my understanding is they did not include the potential of the FEMA reimbursement in their revenue estimates at this time. However, they did try to the city did try to capture as much of those expenditures associated with the storms up through December 31st. So, for example, under public works, a large portion that was some outside service contracts for snow removal.
Mm-hmm. So if the money comes through, then we probably will be balanced or have a slight surplus. Is that?
That is correct. Holding all the things constant, that is correct. And then in regards to general charges, favorable year-end projected variance at 3.5 million. Transfers out appears to be unfavorable by 1.6 million, but that's really associated more with recognizing the ARPA funds being transferred out of the general fund for projects. So just to summarize those two slides I went through, the 3 million total budgetary unfavorable variance in departmental expenditures, 6.3 associated with the police department between the arbitration award, overtime, and responding to the storm, 3.3 million in public works, and then the remaining departments are projected to have a favorable budget variance of 5.7 million with a A significant one being in management information systems of $1 million. Under general charges, favorable budget variance 3.5 can be broken down by 2.4 million under fringe benefits and personal service. Health insurance is favorable by 4 million on a net basis. Retiree health insurance is favorable by 5 million, which is offset by active employee insurance unfavorable by 1 million. And then transfers out currently exceeds budget by 1.6 million, and that's attributed to the ARPA funding. And at year end, we'll see a corresponding amount of revenue as the city draws down the ARPA funds as a pass-through. Moving on to city staffing as of December 31st. The city had budgeted for 2,751 employees. They had filled 2,395, so a vacancy rate of 356 or almost 13%. For the police department, they had a vacancy of 70 or 9.4%, and the fire department had a vacancy of 69 individuals or 9.3%. It is noted the city did start a additional police recruit class in end of January or early February. So those individuals will be accounted for in the third quarter. And then the fire, their next planned recruit class is for, I believe, the first quarter of fiscal year 24.
Bryce, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
How do these percentages of unfilled jobs translate into budgetary savings? Do we have a dollar amount that's associated with that?
I don't have it in front of me right now, but I do have the backup, and I could provide you a rough estimate per department.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the city has any sort of analysis on the cost savings on unfilled jobs in both police and fire, as well as the other departments.
Well, for police and fire, there is not really much of a cost savings because they have the minimal manning requirements.
Yeah, okay.
So if they don't have the positions to fill or filled, somebody has to come in on overtime.
Okay. I was just curious how that translates into monetary savings.
Yeah, I as I said, I don't have that in front of me, but I could get that to you after the
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
At the end of the second quarter, the city is projecting operations to be consistent with the budget with a minor year-end surplus of 300,000. This projecting includes 51.8 million in ARPA funds for revenue replacement. Subsequent events could have a significant impact on the city operations. The potential FEMA reimbursement has not been included in revenue projections at this time. And the total cost estimated for the storms in the two storms in December range between 12 to 14 million. The city has until December 31st, 24 to obligate the remaining 186.5 million of ARPA funds. And the administration has indicated that it is being closely monitored. That brings me to the end of the second quarter report.
Thank you. Do you want to then continue here? With
Absolutely.
the government proposal?
So moving on to Governor Hochul's proposed budget. There's several proposed revenue actions. First one's more at the county level, grants permanent sales tax authority. All counties would be provided with permanent authority to set a local sales tax rate of up to 4% or their current rate of higher. Second one would be return foreclosure access to property owners. So when a tax delinquent property is foreclosed upon by the county and sold, any money the county receives that exceeds their liability amount would be returned to the property owner, minus applicable administrative costs of the local government. Under property tax exemptions, there's a simplification and modernization of the local senior citizens exemption. It's making the process easier for seniors, as well as raising the income level, I believe, from 35,000 to 50,000. There's also the extension of the tax credit for the rehabilitation of historic properties for an additional 5 years. That tax credit is currently available through fiscal year 24. But this proposal would extend it for an additional 5 years. Some of the other ones, under local government finance, this is one of the more significant ones for the city of Buffalo. State aid for the city of Buffalo is held flat at 161.3 million over the financial plan. As a reminder, state aid's been held at this rate since fiscal year 2012. Excuse me. There's additional cybersecurity funding in the executive budget. There is the state's gun involved violence and elimination give additional funding to support 20 police departments in 17 counties that account for more than 80% of the violent crime that occurs outside of New York City. There's the support to the housing production through local government planning and infrastructure grants. The budget makes available to local governments 250 million infrastructure support fund and 20 million planning assistance fund. Provide market rate of interest on court judgments. Allows a variable market-based interest rate for court judgments as opposed to the current fixed rate of 9%. Continued on with the countywide shared services match. There's also the youth employment program. The executive budget includes 37 million in additional state funding for youth employment program operations in gun-involved violence elimination jurisdictions. So executive proposal includes continued investment for transportation funding, chip space, transit operating aid, the state touring routes aid and advertising, and Pave New York. There's also capital funding included to begin work on reconnecting the neighborhoods across the Kensington Expressway. Some of these following programs are ones that have been included previously, or they're just being continued on. There's the local government efficiency grants, the citizens reorganization empowerment grants, citizen empowerment tax credits, and municipal restructuring funds. A lot of these grant dollars are really being used to target consolidations and potentially eliminating duplication of government services. And that brings me to the end of the governor's executive budget proposal.
Okay, Jeanette, would you like to say anything as an overview for the governor's budget in the city of Buffalo?
I think the big concern that we have on our end is that state aid, which is such a significant revenue source to the city of Buffalo, remains flat for another 4 years, projected to remain flat for another 4 years. So that would be useful to see that go up, especially in light of, inflation that the city of Buffalo is encountering along with everybody. But I think that would sum up my big concern on that part of the budget.
I don't know if you can answer this, Jeanette, or maybe somebody from the city, but what's our impressions on the governor's affordable housing plan and its impact on Buffalo? Are we looking at it? Is it something that's going to fit Western New York in particular for affordable housing, or aren't we going to qualify for that?
We're certainly tracking and keeping an eye on what they're doing at the state level. It looks like a lot of that funding is going to be going downstate. Interestingly enough, since that announcement directly here, BMHA announced a significant project with Marine Drive, the Marine Drive apartments, in which they'll be basically knocked down and rebuilt from the bottom up. I think that's we don't have enough details on that to know if any of that state money is going to go into that yet, but that is on our radar screen, so to speak, to have further conversations as they figure out how the funding is going to happen.
Mr. Dowell, do you think, is there anything that the control board can do to help you in this area? Are you looking at it? Would you want a resolution from this board on affordable housing? I know that former Secretary Arthur was a strong proponent in this area, and that we've pushed this for a long time. So I'm just wondering if there's anything other than monitoring it and helping you that might be useful.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I think, any help will be helpful. I do know with the American Rescue Plan money the city received, we did include 16.3 million in affordable housing. And any guidance or support that this group can provide or any other group can help, I'm pretty sure everyone from the administration will take that information, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Delano. Maybe, Jeanette, we can meet after this meeting and talk about some ideas on where that money might be in the state budget to include, maybe increase it above and beyond the ARPA funding. I think that could be important, particularly on the east side and the west side, where I think we need to be able to look at that.
Would ARPA funds be allowed to use for the part of this project?
That is the 16.3 that Mr. Delano just referenced.
Okay.
That will be, I believe, going through Bureau at 16.3.
And what do they estimate again? Pardon my ignorance. What do they estimate as the total cost of this reconstruction?
You're referring to Marine Drive?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'd have to defer that to Mr. Miller.
Yeah, we haven't been presented with details on that, but just the high level summary that Eyewitness said 400 million plus.
Okay.
I don't have any of the specifics for that.
No, I didn't know if the city had any more background information as to this. That's all.
No, it's news to us too.
Okay.
Thanks. If there are any more comments on the second quarter report and the governor's budget, we can move on. Our next agenda item.
Fred.
Okay, sorry.
Perhaps this is a postscript question because it doesn't relate to New York State operating monies per se, but the Cuomo's darling, the Buffalo Billion, that is simply historical. It's something that was, and the fact that we were sort of a regional darling for a while, that is something that was and will not be happen again for another 150 years.
Thank you, Jeanette. We'll note that for the record as we go on.
No, seriously, that's absolutely history, right? There is nothing in Hochul's either budgets or posturing that anything is coming our way as a special earmark.
Not at this time.
Okay.
Nothing to that significance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So our analysis on the tax exempt property within the city, this is something that this board has asked the staff to do for a number of years. And it's included under tab 3 in your book. And Bryce, you're up for the third time.
All right. Thank you. I'll be brief on my comments on this as the full report is in the board books. I just want to touch upon a few highlights here. As a reminder, well, let me start again. This is the review of the property tax exemptions. The most recent citywide reassessment was completed in 2018 and was effective July 1, 2020. Current year, New York State has designated an equalization rate of 78%. There are over 44,890 properties out of almost 94,000 city parcels receiving some type of exemption in the current fiscal year. The city's total assessed value is 17 billion and exemptions total 6 billion. City exemptions represent 35.2% of total assessed value in the current fiscal year. The next slide here is just a high level by exemption category comparing fiscal year 23 to fiscal 2013. Over those 11 years, you can see an increase of 1.4 billion in total exemptions, but a increase of 6.8 billion in the total assessed value. The single largest exemption category is governmental exemptions at 2.4 billion, or roughly 40%, followed by not-for-profit exemptions of 1.5 billion, economic development at 941 million, housing and all other at almost 300,000, and then residential at roughly 850 million in exemptions. And residential exemptions are the only ones that have really decreased over this time. And over that period, it was $228 million. This is just a graph showing where exemptions, the amount of property that was receiving exemption, value of the property in 2005-6 at 47.2%, and going over the last 18 years, you see that the city is down to 35.2%. So this is a significant improvement on behalf of the city. So fewer properties are qualifying and receiving a exemption.
What was that attributable to? Especially that percentage decline from 2019 through 20 to 2021.
Part of that decline there was the reassessment process. So what happened there is the entire city was reassessed. It went into effect in 2020, so that's why you're seeing that significant decrease there. So that allowed the taxes to be evenly distributed. And that's part of the problem they run into when reassessments are not done on an ongoing basis. Certain areas are a little higher than others, and there's that catch up isn't done until full reassessment's done.
So what you're saying is the numerator may still have gone up. It's the denominator because of the value of the property that makes it look smaller. So if we're looking at the number of projects and the value of those projects, we may want to look at those separately to see where this whole thing is as compared to how it's changed over time.
That is correct. And another portion of it is also how New York State changed the STAR tax, the STAR reimbursement, I'm sorry. So beginning, I want to say December 2015, any new purchases, refinancing, those STAR taxes, reimbursements, or STAR exemptions, I'm sorry, are through New York State Department of Taxation and are no longer being handled at the local level.
Okay. I mean, this is just as we look at all of this, I think one thing that we're going to have to consider is with the pandemic and individuals working at home, the value of particularly commercial property in the downtown area may be dramatically impacted. So I guess, Jeanette, I would ask that we, keep a special eye or break out maybe that area in particular to look as an early warning system on whether or not we're going to see a decline in property taxes as the value goes, maybe not this year or next year, but helping the city project, 5 or 10 years out.
Will do. Thank you.
And we have seen a limited impact on that. There have been increased challenges or grievances attributed to the pandemic by some of the commercial areas.
But I just think that that's going to continue on more if people don't come back to work and work in these buildings. It's going to lower the value of those, and we haven't seen that run out yet.
That's correct. Next slide we have here is a quick snapshot of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers. We included the total assessed value, equalized value, the amount exempt, the percent exempt pilots, each city's equalization rate, as well as the available constitutional tax levying margin. In fairness, the city of Buffalo in regards to this is in fairly good shape. They're at about a third of their assessed property exempt. Syracuse is still at that 46, almost 50% of their property exempt. Pilots, you've seen an increase there. Always looking for additional opportunities. Equalization rate. The city is planning another reassessment, so we should see that adjusted in the next few years. Rochester does a reassessment every 4 years, so that you see why their equalization rate is closer to 100%. Yonkers is that outlier that has not reassessed since 1954. But one thing that's very interesting is the position the city is in now to their available constitutional tax levying margin. This has significantly increased over the years. And of the 4 municipalities, they're probably in the best shape. As you can see, they're at 172.4 million. In Yonkers is at 135.8, and their equalized valuation is about 17 billion higher than the city of Buffalo. The next two slides really just look at the city tax rate per 1,000 assessed. Those slides are in your slide deck, so feel free to take a look at them. If you have any questions or would like to discuss, we can go into detail on that later. So we have Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers here. The next slide compares towns, first ring suburbs in Erie County. Tax impact was calculated on a home and fair market value of 150,000 in each of those communities. Another thing to point to is you can see the variance in the equalization rate across the different communities.
I guess on that last side, it would be interesting next year if you could put in what the average or the median home value is, because I think that distorts the picture, particularly given the city of Buffalo and the changing prices that have occurred over the last year in some of the suburbs.
Absolutely. And actually on the previous one, we did include the median for those cities. And just we went with the 150 just to kind of equalize it across all the communities, but I can definitely add the median home value for the local towns around the city of Buffalo. This slide is comparison exempt versus non-exempt assessed property value over the last 10 years. Total assessed value in 2013-14 was 10.2 billion. Current fiscal year it's 17 billion. So you can see an increase in non-exempt property going from 5.6 billion up to 11 billion. Whereas the exempt property went from 4.6 billion up to 6 billion. So there wasn't that much of an increase in the exemptions. This slide, Director Jurasek asked us pull it together previously. What we're looking at here is the maximum taxing levy compared to the annual property tax levy. So the blue line represents the maximum taxing levy, and the orange indicates the property tax levy for that year. So in fiscal year 2003, the city was at roughly 92% of their authorized taxing levy. Over the last 20 years, the actual property tax levies held pretty fairly constant, anywhere from 135 million up to 154 million. But current year, you're seeing a cities only utilizing 40% of their available taxing levy. So they have some capacity in there now. So Total assessed property value for fiscal 23 was 16.9 billion.
Yeah.
That's an increase of 6.8 billion or 67% from 10.1 billion fiscal year 2013. That 1.4 billion increase in exemptions can be broken down in the following categories. Government exemptions, 711 million. Non-for-profit exemptions, 544 million. Increase in economic development exemptions of 250 million. An increase of 5 million in housing and all other. And then we have the decrease in residential exemptions of approximately 228 million. And the decrease in residential exemptions is really attributed to the STAR and how that reimbursement's being conducted now, as well to a lesser degree, a decrease in veterans exemptions. And then in the next couple slides, directors, you can look at these at your leisure. It's just a little more detail by government exemptions, not-for-profits, some of the highlights that have occurred within those exemption categories. This slide here really just looks at year to year 22 to 23. Any significant changes were really just addressed in the 11-year look back, as year to year it's fairly minimal. So just going down, implementation of the reassessment occurred on July 1, 2020. The implementation next reassessment is scheduled to go in effect July 1, 2025. This slide here is just a quick snapshot of the 485s. Those are the mixed use properties for exemptions. It's a 12-year exemption. So we show the year that the exemption was applied, number of properties under the exemption, the assessed value, exempt amount, and then when it is expected to expire. There are currently 127 properties valued at 709 million, receiving 583 million in exemptions. Approximately 18% of those properties is taxable and included on the roll of a value of $127 million. These exemptions are set to expire over the next 11 years. Now, this one is just expanding the 485A impact out over the next 11 years, going all the way out to 2034. We have the initial year of the exemption, the calculated full exemption amount year one, and then the amount that's rolling off in each year. So at the very bottom, you have a compounding effect. So at the end of the current fiscal year, there will be $33.4 million in exemptions. They'll no longer be exempt. They'll be returning to the tax roll. By fiscal year 2034, that amount increases to roughly $583 million in exemptions that will no longer be exempt. And this is before the city does their next reassessment. So one would expect to see those amounts increasing over that time. And just for clarification, properties that qualify for the 485A do pay a portion of property tax because they maintain what the property was valued at. They have to the project, they still have to pay that amount. So they're only exempt on the new construction, the investments that are made over that 12-year period. So I know I went through that rather quickly. This was more of a update for the directors as we've had this item reviewed over the last few years. So I apologize for going through it so quickly, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time, or additional detail any director would like us to follow up on.
Thanks, Bryce. That's great.
I think that the comparative presentation of data as Bryce just did across 4 cities. That's the kind of analytic perspective, data presentation that I think has always been so gosh darn way super useful for us. It's what we almost never can get our hands on in terms of the district, for example. So here's the question, Bryce. Nice work, superb work. Did you have to assemble all of those separate data categories for those 4 cities, or was it readily available, or did the city just plug you into it, or?
All the materials available, I just had to use the correct corresponding documents to find it. So I had to do the leg work and pull it, but it's all public information, just takes a little time to pull it together.
Okay, so it's all there, but okay. Okay,
It's an amazing presentation, Bryce.
it's superb. Superb.
Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
I'm gonna turn over the chair now to Director Sanfilippo. So for good warning to go on to the school district. And I apologize, but I've got to go teach. So everyone have a great rest of the meeting.
Okay. So I'm going to assume there aren't any more questions or comments regarding Bryce's presentation. None? Okay, then let's move on to the district items. A review of the second quarter report and a review of the New York State executive budget. So we will now move to the district items. The 2 district items to be addressed are a review of the second quarter report and the proposals within the executive budget that could impact the Buffalo School District. The BFA staff report on the second quarter is included under tab 4. And with that, Nathan, would you please review these items with us?
Absolutely. Good afternoon.
Nathan, real quick, do you want me to stop sharing and you take over?
I have it right now.
You do? Okay.
Yep, no problem. Thank you. The following is the BFSA's analysis of the Buffalo City School District's fiscal year 22-23 second quarter report. The second quarter report includes the current fiscal year end projections by the district as of January 15th, 2023, based on actual financial results as reported on December 31st, 2022. So to start off, we'll look at some of the significant events that have occurred in the second quarter. This is an update. This is reported on within the first quarter. The district continues to experience labor shortages in several critical areas. These include transportation. There is a shortage of bus drivers, which are not district employees, but first student employees who the district contracts with, but also with bus aides. There has been a lot of progress with that, and I'll have a slide later on to demonstrate some of that. Within instruction, there's a shortage. The current teacher vacancy rate is 5.5%. That has come down from the second quarter, from the first quarter. And then a pretty sizable operating engineer vacancy rate of 39%. That has increased over the course of the school year. One item that was listed after the first quarter that's no longer present here is within exempt employees. The vacancy rate within that employee group is no longer significant. And the second item was subsequent to the second quarter. Back in January 27th, the New York State PERB Board, issued a fact-finding report regarding a potential settlement of terms between the district and the Teachers Federation. PERB determined that the 2 parties were in an impasse and appointed a fact finder for the purposes of inquiring into the causes and circumstances of the dispute. And they did issue a non-binding a ruling on that, which is now a public document. Okay. Next, we have an update on the 2 ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 plans. These are the CRRSA ESSER 2 and the American Rescue Plan ESSER 3 grant funds. So this table I have here, I provide the 2021, or excuse me, the 21-22 adopted budget, and then what the actual expenditures were for that year by those two funds, how the current fiscal year's budget is revised, and then the actual spend to date in the current fiscal year. So within 22-23, ESSER 2 funds remaining that have been spent are 18.1. That includes all actual expenditures as well as encumbrances. And then with ESSER 3 is just over 39 million for a total of 57.2 million. Now ESSER 2 came out a year prior to the ESSER 3. All of these grant funds need to be committed by April 1st of this year. And the grant ends September 30th of 2023. With ESSER 3, you have one more year. So requisitions and purchase orders have an end date of April 1st, 2024. And then the grant for that ends September 30th, 2024, later in that year. Okay, this just gives an overview of the adopted budget and then where the district is projecting the fiscal year end. So the budget was adopted with a $34.6 million deficit that was filled with a corresponding amount of fund balance. The current projection is somewhat less at 16.1, and that would constitute an $18.5 million favorable budgetary variance. So an actual surplus of 16.1 from the original projection.
What does that do to their accumulated fund balance?
What that would do is that 16.1 is the amount of fund balance at this point forecast to be used to close this year's deficit. So it would be reduced by that amount.
And what is the total again? I'm sorry.
The total fund balance?
Yeah.
I don't know the exact
You know
number.
what?
It's
What's
just
the
over 300
total-
million.
What's the total available fund balance that they have?
Total fund balance is just north of 300 million. I believe unassigned is around 85 million, give or take.
Unassigned is 85 million. Okay.
Not an exact number, but within that proximity.
And that was, okay, and then you add the 18.5 on top of that, or is that included?
That 18.5 is the difference between the original projected deficit
Mhm.
and the current deficit.
Okay.
So it's a reduction of what the anticipated use was from the adopted. So just taking a closer look at the general fund revenues, the only one right now that is projected to be different from the adopted budget is within Erie County sales tax. The district has a favorable variance of about $3 million over budget. BFSA's independent analysis thinks it's going to be much higher at about 10.6. And this is just based on receipts to date and then, the cyclical trends. So that's our projection for the current fiscal year end. As far as expenditures, overall, the district's projecting a $15.5 million favorable variance combined within all general fund expenditures. Compensation is a big part of that at $12.5 million. Reason being is there's a considerable amount of vacancies, which we discussed earlier, about north of 300. But also we had the note here that budgetary transfers from various expenditure items have been performed to address the estimated $2.9 million in incremental employee compensation costs. And this is from the 4 contracts that were settled earlier in the fiscal year. So that line has been adjusted upward to compensate for the new expenditures, but there is now a variance projected based on the hypothetical 100% fill that's in the adopted budget but acknowledging that there's vacancies to date. And just like with the employee compensation, employee benefits are also forecast to be favorable based on the actual compensation to date. Benefits are favorable by 2.3, and then I break it down here by the two retirement funds and then also the Social Security. Payments to charter schools are projected to be $6.5 million favorable at fiscal year end. Again, based on the actual pupil count, the initial expenditures based on what was projected, and this is an update to that. So less people in area charter schools than included within the adopted budget.
How are the receivables for collecting from these charter schools back into the general fund? I know it's been delinquent. It's been delinquent in the past. I didn't know if they're current with their reimbursements.
That's a separate area. I could double
No,
check with the
maybe if
district.
there's someone from the school district that's on, let's see if that's up to date on their reimbursement recovery.
I don't believe we have a district official on, but I can certainly reach out to the CFO to get an update on reimbursement requests to see the status.
Yeah,
of that.
that would be great. That would be great. Thank you.
Certainly. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Transportation overall is a $3 million current fiscal year end favorable variance. And again, based on actual level of services provided to date. And then with this slide, I wanted to give an update on what's going on with transportation because it has been such an issue this year, not just with Buffalo, but nationwide. So within the school district here, management has taken several steps. The one top here is reimbursing the parents for transporting their children, expressing routes, which just means that it's more of a consolidated route so that the total number of runs are reduced, and enhancing before school programming. There were additional actions that were proposed but not taken or may not be taken or will not be implemented. And that included distributing NFTA passes to families. This would be for elementary schools, and that was examined, then tabled. High school students already do get NFTA passes to get to and from the high schools. And adjusting bell times from 2 to 3. This was a proposal that would reduce the total number of less than the number of buses on the road at once, but the proposal itself was rejected by the BTF. And so that's at a standstill. And then to date, the numbers are within the report, but there has been a lot of progress. The district reported the number of students impacted by the driver shortage has steadily declined since September. Back in September, the number was about 400 students in the morning and just over 1,000 in the afternoon. The last number that I have available to me was in November. It was down to 65 morning and just under 500 for the afternoon. So it's still an issue, but progress has been made steadily throughout the course of the school year. This table here is a depiction of the reserve for contingency expenditure. It totaled 30.1 million in the adopted budget, or about 3% of that adopted budget. It's been reduced to 19.9 million in the modified budget, or about 2% of total appropriations. It's been adjusted via budget transfers to address the newly added employee compensation and benefit expenditures from the settled labor agreements. So over the year, the district has reduced these lines through budget transfers for the areas that they needed up for the new contract expenditures. And so that top unsettled labor contracts, that amount has been reduced from 26.2 down to 17.3. And finally, within miscellaneous all other expenditures, overall a 8.8 million current fiscal year unfavorable variance is projected. And what makes that up is agency tuition favorable by 2 million. This is the tuition payments that the district makes to area agencies for educational services. Contracts custodial is unfavorable by 1.8 million. That relates directly to the local 409 contract. And then this large number here, the 9 million in interfund transfers. Interfund transfers are forecast to be unfavorable by 9 million based on transfers to the capital fund and to the summer handicap program. The district's revised deficit. District has forecasted a total of $16.1 million deficit for the current fiscal year. And as I said, an $18.5 million current fiscal year favorable budgetary variance. And as I noted, the BFSA forecasts the sales tax revenues to be significantly greater. Then just a recommendation here. I'll summarize this. The district's upcoming financial plan should be developed utilizing reasonable student enrollment numbers. The current financial plan was predicated on enrollment numbers that were overstated. And this key underlying assumption is no longer reasonable based on most recent head count and beds counts. The reduction of the number of students is estimated at 620, which impacts not only the financial plan widely, but also the planned provision of educational services. That concludes my brief summary of the district's second quarter report. Were there any further questions?
Yeah, any further comments or questions for Nate?
Nate, next time it is apropos, can you please update your longitudinal summary of two data points, the comparative one of charter population and district populations? You've been maintaining that across time, and now we have probably 2 years of fresh data since I think the last time you presented that to us. So next time it's apropos in one of your reports.
Certainly, I can provide that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further comments or questions for Nate? Okay, well then let's move on to the Buffalo Renewal Agency financial review. We will review the second quarter report and the BFSA's analysis on the second quarter report, which is provided to everyone under tab 5. So Bryce, would you please review this item with us?
Director Sanfilippo, I believe, well, I don't believe I know, and Nathan had a couple comments on the executive budget as it relates to the school district.
Okay, I
just
apologize.
circle back on that. No, that's fine.
Okay,
Nate?
yeah, just a quick summary of the executive budget. This was released back at the end of January. School aid increases from 31.4 billion to 34.5, 3.1 billion, or just under 10%. Now, what that includes is year 3 of 3 to fully fund the current foundation aid formula. This is an increase of 2.7 billion or 12.8%. Every single school district will receive a minimum of a 3% increase. And within that large increase, $250 million is dedicated to support high impact tutoring for students struggling to recover from pandemic related learning loss. That's not an additional 250 million. That's within the increase of 2.7 billion. All other school aids would be increased by 392 million based on the statutory minimum, or 1.8% increase. Some of the individual proposed executive budget actions include a special education tuition rate setting reform. It's a grant of $2.5 million for NYSED to study and design a new rate setting methodology in order to streamline and improve timelines for tuition rate for providers. And then an additional $125 million annually to support public pre-K programs. You'll see that number that when I show the district's proposed aid amount, Buffalo's pre-K number goes up, and it's been static for a number of years. With charter schools outside of New York City, the rates established are based on average annual growth in the area school district spending. The item was mentioned in the news today, permanently authorize the reissuance of any charter originally issued to a charter school that was subsequently closed after July 1, 2015 due to surrender, revocation, termination, or non-renewal. And this would not mean that charters at schools that had charters that were closed would reopen. What that means is that the regional caps that include those schools that are now closed would adjust for that. So, if say hypothetically the cap were 100 and one of the schools closed, out of the 90 that existed, it went down to 89, there would now be 11 potential schools rather than 10. So it would increase the number of schools that could potentially open. Well, just taking a look at the proposed state aid. This shows what actual state aid was in 21-22. I break it out by foundation aid, building aid, and then a composite service and all other formula-based aids, and then the universal pre-K grant, which is recorded within the special projects fund, not the general fund. Proposed aid from 23 to state fiscal year 2024 would go up overall. Foundation aid overall would go up 72.5 million, and total New York State aid for Buffalo would go up 78 million. Then finally, I break this out by the big four districts: Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers. The top half shows what total proposed aid is for each of those four school districts. And then I have a close approximation of what the per pupil aid would be for those four school districts based on those districts' enrollment numbers. And some of them are actual and some of them are projected for the year, but they're the most available, the data that's most readily available at the moment. And so the bottom there is anywhere from Buffalo at close to 22,000 per student, and all the way down to Yonkers, which is just under 11,000 per pupil. That's my conclusion for the updating from the school district, their aid from the executive proposal.
So that's the total presentation.
Yes, I have nothing further to add to that.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the board?
Nate, my question, or rather my question is, as was mine to Bryce. So the comparative data, did you have to assemble that as Bryce did from publicly available data? There's
Director
no.
Jurasek, I did. It was not a heavy lift. The data is publicly available, but I did compile it myself from various sources.
But you have in the past bravely, on your own, tried to assemble a comparative view across multiple data points. And I guess it just became too hard to do because it just became too hard to do. Does that sound right, the way I just put it? Because there is no single source for this.
No, there's not. You do need to go to the various school districts and get their enrollment numbers and cross-reference that against NYSID's numbers, and there's research involved. So that's appropriate.
Yeah, but you have to extract from individual sites, districts, organizations rather. You have to extract from them and then cross-check with state to make sure it's accurate. And then, thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem.
Nate, one quick question. Looking at your comparable school districts information, Any particular reason why, let's say, the City of Rochester School District has the highest aid per pupil than whether it's Buffalo or Syracuse, and especially Yonkers? I mean, what would be, what's the determining factor that would make these kinds of discrepancies?
Yeah, well, Yonkers is a separate altogether, but Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester are all fairly similar. When I looked at the formula, one of the things that drives, the biggest thing that drives it is what the current foundation aid is. And that's your base. That's where the start, where the formula begins. So whatever they got in the current year, they'll get that in the next year. It doesn't seem to, there's not there's a published formula, but not a methodology, how they derive the number. And so you do have to sort of guess and make an educated guess how these numbers fall in. Part of that equation is pupil need index. Part of it is regional adjustments. And from what I could tell, like Rochester has the highest according to that. That is
What, poverty level?
it's well,
I'm just trying to, actually, this isn't for our board to discuss, but I'm just
Yeah.
looking at the numbers and I'm going, why would Rochester somehow, whether it's the foundation aid per pupil, considering the economics of both the city and Rochester. I mean, I guess this is more for the state legislature to take a look at, or the school district, as to why, and I'm not trying, it's not us versus them, is when we try to get some consistency on how they apply the, these aid formulas. That's all.
yeah, I that stood out to me, and I have somewhat of an answer, but I couldn't come up with a clean answer why that was why
Yeah,
that.
no, I'm just looking at it as someone who's just glancing at it and trying to put together some rationale as to, why would the city of Buffalo somehow be, 5,000 less a pupil, given its given its poverty level. So that's, we're like one of the largest poverty stricken cities in the country. But like I said, I didn't know how they apply these formulas for aid distribution. Any other further comments for Nathan?
Thank you, Nathan.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I guess it's safe to assume now that we can move forward with the Buffalo Urban Renewal Financial Review. Once again, we'll move to review the second quarter report, the BFSA's analysis on the second quarter report, which is under your book tab 5. And Bryce, would you please review this item for us?
All right. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to touch upon Bureau's second quarter report as of December 31st. First slide here is just that snapshot of total program year 48 funds provided the city of Buffalo, and specifically the amount that Bureau has to administer the programs. These funds became available to Bureau to draw down at the end of December of 2022. So revenues will approximately equal expenditures at year end. There is a variance to expenditures through the second quarter of 8.3 million. 6.7 million has been expended during this time. Year 48 funds were released in December of 2022. Through the first 6 months, prior year funds were utilized to fund current year expenditures to date. 28 out of 41 positions were filled as of December 31st. Bureau is actively trying to recruit for those positions. Administrative and planning costs total 1.6 million. This is a $200,000 favorable variance for Bureau. Bureau has received significant additional federal funds, including the CDBG CV, which is the CARES Act funding. Also, federal ARPA funds that will be passed through from the city of Buffalo, and then the lead hazard remediation funds. This is just a snapshot of quarterly or revenues and expenditures through December 31st, budget to actual and their variances. Total revenues had a variance of 8.2 million or 55.3% through December 31st. Significant variances include 4.1 million through the Affordable Housing Advancement Fund. This delay is attributed to the city still working through the RFA, RFQ process for the ARPA funds. And then there's the 3.2 million for the CDBG CV CARES Act fund. On the expenditure side, you'll see corresponding variances there of the 4.1 and 3.2. Bureau really just doesn't draw down the funds until they're needed. So if the expenditures do not occur, they're not drawing those funds down. The CARES Act was authorized by Congress and signed into law in March of 2020. Originally awarded 11.4 million to Bureau, with 6.4 million dispersed as of December 31st. The balance of 5 million is to be obligated by January 6, 2025, and then dispersed by January 6 of 2027. The city has provided ARPA funds to Bureau. 20.3 million in total ARPA funds have been provided to Bureau, and that includes the investment in the healthy initiative on the east side, as well as those affordable housing dollars. As of December 31st, 200,000 has been dispersed, and that's really for administrative and planning purposes. The balance of 20.1 million of ARPA funds is to be obligated by December 31, 24, and then dispersed by December 31, 26. And then another grant Bureau has been administering is the lead hazard grant. So there's a balance of 1.6 million remaining of December 31st, and those funds must be expended by April 4th, 2024. As directors are aware, Bureau is really dependent on their partners that they work with in the community to file the paperwork for the funds to be drawn down. So sometimes from a cash flow perspective, it can be tricky, as they expect funds to potentially be drawn down by the second quarter, but if there's a delay, it sometimes gets pushed to the third or the fourth quarter. So those were my statements on the Bureau quarterly report.
So that's it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are there any comments or questions for Bryce? There being none, let's move on to the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority review of the second quarter report. The final agenda item is the review of the second quarter. The BFSA staff report on this item is provided under tab 6. And Nathan Miller will review this item for us. Nathan, would you please begin?
Certainly. Okay, so the following is an overview of the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority's second quarter financial results. First, I wanted to briefly discuss some of the developments within both the AMPS and Marine Drive. And there we go. There's more detail within the report, but from a high level overview, within the AMPS, BMHA continues to develop an asset repositioning program and to finalize terms of 2 developers for 927 total AMP housing units. And they're listed out here. Commodore Perry Homes, the extension, and the extension high rises, and then also with Schaefer Village. The 2 developers there are Penrose and the Buffalo Equitable Housing Collaborative, excuse me. in just 2023, these two tables will show a breakdown of all the major comprehensive modernization plans and then the capital plan. So overall, with major improvements, modernization improvements are 24.2 million. They're listed out here between 4 of those amps. And then the capital improvements here are listed out by 4 amps, totaling $7 million. Anywhere from bathroom renovations to site improvements. Then, as noted earlier within the meeting, Marine Drive had a big announcement back in February 9th. The Marine Drive apartments themselves are not going to be retrofitted. The existing structures are going to be, replaced over a 10-year period through 3 phases, with a cost that's in the excess of $400 million. And so we don't have the details on this, and a lot is being developed now, but the idea would be that the existing structures would be, a new structure would be built. Once it's built, people would move into that new tower, and then the former tower would be raised, and that would try to minimize the impact on the residents there. So they wouldn't be moving twice, they'd be moving once. But like I said, a lot of this is all high level, and the specific details have not been provided to BFSA. One area of note, this comes directly from the budget and financial plan report. Marine Drive adopted budget and a financial plan is not balanced. A 4-year deficit of $1 million is projected, with a $1.8 million total negative cash outflow projected over the same period. When this was presented, the BMHA response was that 2 items: the submission of a request to New York Homes and Community Renewal to increase the rents, potentially yielding an additional $250,000 in annual dwelling income. This request was sent in, and BMHA believes that they'll have approval for it to be implemented in April of this year. The second is to request to designate 200+ apartments as project-based housing voucher units, potentially yielding an additional $800,000 in annual revenues. So this would not be additional revenue, but it would be a transfer from the Section 8 fund to the Marine Drive budget, and not the Section 8 fund, but the Section 8 budget to the Marine Drive budget. If these were not to come to fruition, BFSA had a recommendation that BMH should prepare a contingency plan. This is just a snapshot of where the Marine Drive budget is year to date. It was adopted with $100,000 of net operating loss. Revenues are stronger at 2.2 over 1.7 million, but expenditures are also unfavorable to date. And so the current net operating loss before debt service is 300,000. And then the same number after removing the impact of the non-cash OPEB and adjusting for the principal payment on debt. So this table here takes a look at the consolidated, all 4 of BMHA's budgets, the AMP, Marine Drive, Section 8, and the COCC. Consolidated revenues are favorable by 600,000 year to date. That's 51.2% of budget. Significantly within that is net dwelling income within AMPS and within Marine Drive. Section 8 vouchers as well have come in. BMHA has received more voucher dollars, which would also be dispensed in that amount. Consolidated expenses are favorable by $500,000 year to date. A lot of this stems from employee compensation and benefit costs. There's a vacancy rate within BMHA, and so there have been budgetary savings within a lot of different employee positions. Maintenance here is listed as unfavorable by 300,000. That's within unfavorable variances within maintenance contracts and other maintenance supply and related costs. And finally, this is just a snapshot of where BMHA is at December 31st with their staffing. This is a somewhat larger vacancy rate than I've seen historically. It's typically anywhere as low as 10% up to about 20%. So that's about as high as it's been in recent years as far as a percentage. There is a 22 positions within asset management, and those deal directly within the AMPS. And then just to summarize, BMHA is operating within its budget as of mid-year. Revenues exceeded budget to date by 600,000, including 1.1 in net dwelling income and 600,000 within public housing authority grants. BFSA believes that rental receipts were under budgeted. This is an odd bullet point that I have, but it really was 2018-19 when that was the last fiscal year where a fiscal year was not impacted by a governmentally imposed eviction moratorium. It seems so long ago. Total expenses were favorable overall by 300,000. I just point out that utilities were somewhat over budget by 100,000, but the electricity expense stands out because it was 400,000 or 75% of total budget. General expenses were under budget to date amount by 1.2. So overall expenses were under budget, but I do point out the anomalies there that were over. Then just to conclude, BMHA has taken the steps needed to address the structural deficits within the aforementioned Marine Drive adopted budget and financial plan, but they're not finalized at this time. And then future information related to the redevelopment of Marine Drive will be provided to BFSA at a point in the future. That is all I have regarding the BMHA second quarter report. Were there questions?
Okay, does anybody have any further comments or questions for Nate? Okay, so moving on, tab 7, 8, and 9 are informational items to the board. Does there anybody want to make a comment or have questions regarding those three tabs? There not being any, then let's open the floor to new business. Is there any new business that needs to be discussed? The answer is yes. And I believe it's important to ask Delano for an update on the financial plan and the revisions to address the discrepancy of the 38.5 million between the financial plan and the city's ARPA recovery plan.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I have had conversations with representatives from the BFSA in regards to the variance and what the city reported and used in lost revenue over the next 3 years, or in a 4-year plan compared to what was approved in the ARPA spending plan, where the city's ARPA spending plan set aside $100 million in lost revenue, where in the 4-year plan, we're showing a use of, I think, 138 million in lost revenue. So at this point in time, we are looking at spending plan to see where we can move or adjust budgets that was set aside for the 27 programs that was approved. And we're also looking at where can we possibly adjust revenues and expenditures in a 4-year plan. Right now, at this point, I have not been able to truly identify where we'd like to make those adjustments. So we are fully aware that the two reports do not balance, but we will be doing an amendment with the ARPA spending plan with some of the projects and add-in projects. So the goal is hopefully some of the programs were over budgeted and reduce the over budget amount and move those funds over to lost revenue. But at this point, we're still going through the RFAs and other programs to see how much these programs are really cost or how much funding can the recipients really use. So we continue to look at to balance out the 4-year plan in regards to the lost revenue. We do know that a budget 4-year plan is due, a new one is due 5/1/2023. and we'll continue to look at it. I will have actually tomorrow a conversation with the director of budget and also Commissioner Estrich, and have a discussion with them to look at the financial to see where can we adjust based off the information we have now. We know the 4-year plan was put together last year based off the information that was available. And what we're hoping, like we're seeing like in sales tax, that's trending a little higher than expected. So we're looking at certain revenue streams where they might come in higher, and then also expenditures, what expenditures or appropriations can we adjust in our 4-year plan. So we're hoping to have a little bit more time at a cutoff date, and we'll adjust accordingly based off the information we can gather.
Are there any comments or questions for Delano relative to his update?
Yes, just this easy calendar question. Is there a clock ticking? A hard calendar stop for you to be able to make changes like this?
What we're hoping is hopefully within the next 15 to 30 days.
No, I didn't mean, excuse me, I didn't mean internally. I meant by the federal agencies. You know, is it June 30th that you have to have adjustments in, or 100 days after you had submitted the original?
No, I mean, that's that when we adjust, or when we amend the spending plan, that's just something where we'll go over with the Common Council. We'll file our amendment with the Common Council. Common Council will approve it. We'll have conversation with the Common Council first. The thing is that spending plan, I believe, was approved June 2021. So anytime we make adjustments to any of the approved programs, we have to go over it with the Common Council and have it approved by the Common Council.
Okay, and again, maybe my question was too simple, given your really good, thorough response. By when do you have to submit the amended spending plan?
There's no deadline.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
To do spending. The thing is that we will note it to the Treasury. We report out quarterly. I think that's right stated earlier. We report out to the Treasury quarterly. So we're about to end the first quarter at the end of this month. The first quarter of the federal government Treasury calendar year end. And then we have 30 days after the end of the first quarter to respond. So in that first quarter P&E report, which is the project and expenditure report, we'll report our adjustments. If we have the amendment done this quarter, if not, we'll report it in the second quarter. All
right, good. So the deadlines are internal. You have a little bit of breathing space in terms of the federal level. Right, and we in this analysis, and one thing we express to our group is that these the use of this ARPA dollars and a lot of these projects, they've been out there in the public, so they're expecting us really to use the money. So what we're doing is trying to fund all of the programs that we stated in the spending plan. And like I said, if we over budgeted back in June 2021, so some of these programs, then we'll have funds from there. Hopefully, we could take those funds and we'll move them over to lost revenue. We did ask accounting, Bill Ferguson and his group, do analysis on the lost revenue. And we can't take in an additional, I believe, $50 million in lost revenue. Right now, the goal was not to take that 50 or a portion of it, because if we take 50 million and put in lost revenue, then we take a 50 million from projects and programs that the public is looking for us to use far as to help with COVID. But we're talking, we're having conversations, and and I know Jeanette and her team has kept us aware and have been in communications with myself in regards to this variance that we know that we have to take care of. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, there being none, just as a reminder, the next board meeting and committee meetings are upcoming on May 17th. And also the following meetings of Audit, Finance and Budget and Board after that are also on Wednesday, June 21st. So this concludes the meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. Is there a motion to adjourn?
As moved.
Okay, second? No second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion passed and the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
I know.
Goodbye.
Thank you.